Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Building Better Accessibility Teams and Partnerships. My name is Todd Marquis Boutin. I'm the Senior Director of Accessibility here at Straive, and I'm glad you could join us today. So, what will we be talking about today? I'd like to provide you with a little bit of background on how we all ended up here. In talking to clients, I've often found they tell a very similar origin story. They were thrust into the world of accessibility with very short timelines and limited budgets, and they found themselves racing to find a fix for the situation they're in. They were essentially in survival mode. And either the one person who volunteered or someone with related experience or someone who was assigned the job just because someone had to do it was launched into this effort to make their products accessible. And they worked hard, and they worked together, and they figured out a way to get through this initial stage of accessibility, but they were left wondering, there must be a better way to do this. We're committed to accessibility. We want to produce products that work well for the broadest possible customer base. How can we do this better next time? And a lot of the questions that sprung from those conversations related to how they could organize their team more efficiently, how the people who are invested in this accessibility work could better understand the roles they could play in helping it happen more efficiently and producing better products. So today, I'm joined by three great panelists who will start a conversation about ways companies can start organizing themselves and assigning roles and defining their mission to help produce better accessible products. We'll start with an introduction to the webinar. Then we'll briefly meet the speakers, and I'm so glad to have three great speakers today whom I've worked with in the past and who have helped me learn a lot about accessibility. And then we'll cover four topics. First, we'll discuss some of the challenges with starting and growing accessibility operations. Then we'll talk a little bit about partnering with accessibility vendors who are often part of accessibility solutions as a company's accessibility operations mature. We'll then extend this conversation into considering ways that companies can develop a culture of accessibility. And finally, we'll look at a tool companies can use, a very powerful tool for defining roles and responsibilities called Accessibility Roles and Responsibilities Mapping Matrix. And for anyone who joined us for our first webinar, I will say I have a sort of dual purpose in this particular presentation. Jennifer Chadwick, who's a part of our panel today, did a great job starting to explain ARRM, but we had so much fun talking that we ran out of time to fully cover it. So part of my intent in this webinar, our intent, is to more fully cover what ARRM is about and the potential for helping you design accessibility teams using it. I will say when you get a copy of this PowerPoint, you can refer to the final slide on the PowerPoint, which talks a little bit about the accessibility of the PowerPoint itself. We put a high priority on making sure any content we share, not just the content that someone's paying us for, is made accessible. So please refer to that. All right, so let's start by doing a little housekeeping. Today, CART services are provided by Caption First. We're very happy to have a captioner from Caption First as part of our team. You can access them through closed captions. We're also joined by two ASL interpreters from Interpreter Now, who will be signing for us today. In a moment, we will start introducing ourselves. During the Meet the Speaker section of the presentation, I would ask that you take a few moments to answer some poll questions. There's 6 poll questions. They're designed to help us get a better idea of where all the audience members are coming from in terms of their experience with accessibility, some of the challenges they might be facing, the roles that they currently play in relation to accessibility, and so on. As we wrap up introducing ourselves, the poll will close, and then everybody will review the poll questions together. Finally, I'd like to say we encourage questions to be asked throughout the webinar. You can use the Q&A tool as part of Zoom to ask your questions. Given the number of participants and the time we have, we'll try to pull some questions from the chat throughout the course of the webinar to talk about directly. Otherwise, but I always like to reassure people that no question will go unanswered. If we don't get to your question today, we will take all of the questions after the webinar, and we as a group, I and Jennifer and Brian and Pina, will review them and provide our collective knowledge through email. We really view these webinars as being the start of a dialogue, the start of a conversation or conversations between we, the panelists, and you, the audience members, or any of us individually and you, the audience members. I know I myself, having attended many of these presentations, come up with my best questions after I'm done attending the presentation. And I have a chance to sort of mull over what everybody's talked about. And I always sort of kick myself and think, I should have asked that during the presentation. Well, we're giving you the opportunity to follow up with us afterwards. All right, so I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. My name, as I mentioned earlier, is Todd Marquis Boutin. I'm the Senior Director of Accessibility here at Straive, and I wear many hats in that role. I directly oversee our alt text authoring services and audio description services, but I also help coordinate multi-service accessibility solutions by acting as a liaison and a consultant between our clients and our product specialists. We took a little bit different approach to the sort of standard meet the speakers slides today. Instead of providing you with a curriculum vitae, and you can review our bios in the webinar summary, we thought we'd give you a couple hopefully interesting facts about ourselves and then express some thoughts or some quotes which capture what we feel is important about accessibility or some knowledge we'd like to share about accessibility. To me, my first thought I would like to share is the most important word in accessibility is and. So this is sort of a confession for me. When I started in accessibility a decade ago, the primary mode of operation within the educational publishing industry was take these digital products that have been sort of really people have poured effort into and finalized and try to retrofit them to make sure they work with assistive technologies. As a result, I initially had the mindset that accessibility was an either or proposition. You can either have this beautiful product that was designed for people who are going to view it, or you could sort of squeeze it and twist it to make it into something that would work for people who listen to it or who experienced it through their fingertips. Over the decade, through interventions by Jen and Pina and a bunch of other great accessibility professionals, as well as users, I've learned that that's not true. A product can be beautiful visually, and it can be beautiful to someone who listens to it or to who experiences it through their fingertips. It can be someone who relies on assistive technology can have a visual impairment, and they can have a hearing impairment. An accessible product can be useful to someone who listens to the content because of a need, such as a visual impairment, or it can be useful to someone like me who has an easier time concentrating when I listen to emails or when I listen to books. So I think the word "and" is very important. And to the point of today's presentation, accessibility belongs to developers and content authors and designers and project managers and leaders. Just being mindful of time, I'd like to also say that one more example is accessibility lives inside tags. It's about defining headings. It's about defining roles, and it lives between the tags. It's about the actual text, the content that you're providing in products. I'll go on. I've already talked too long. This is I hope this is not foreboding. I'll pass it on to you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Thompson. Right now, my current role is the Manager of Accessibility, Strategy and Implementation at Great Minds. Great Minds is an education, curriculum, content creator. We're starting to get into the world of learning management systems, and I was brought on to help usher that progress. It's endlessly fascinating to me, accessibility, and that's why once I started in it, I didn't really want to take any other job. I made it so that it was part of my job function wherever I went. And I'm sure that's similar to how a lot of people have started, and probably the panelists here today. Right now, I would say the most interesting aspect to me in accessibility is the idea of learning, in the sense that everybody learns differently. We could be visual, tactile, whatever it may be, but there's a process there that teachers intend students to go through to understand something. That's not always accessible. So we've got all these different ways to manage it, but beyond management, how do we actually define a new way, a new approach to teach a lesson that may have been too difficult before, or we didn't have the technology before to approach. And that's why in the second bullet, you'll see the idea of learning experience and design and gamification, because that's where so much of our learning management systems are going. So the quote that I have here, I think why it's my favorite is that it gives me pause every time I hear it. It makes me really consider the fabric of accessibility in day-to-day life, in that it's beyond our jobs. It's a reality, right? So if we have the opportunity to do something a little bit better for someone that makes a massive impact on their day-to-day lives, like what more rewarding job function could you have? And that's what drives me.
Excellent. All right, Pina. Why don't you
Hello,
introduce
everyone. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Pina Benitez. I am the principal owner of a company called Aequum Global Access, and we help organizations develop their accessibility strategies, their own roadmaps towards compliance and towards achieving a culture of change. From my perspective, I think my story really is a little bit different in the sense that I opted to really focus on enabling organizations make that change in a way that it can be sustained, in a way that it is part of what they do every day, so that it isn't something that is an add-on into their processes and really, is seen as a burden to developers, designers, and so on and so forth. I come from an environment where I acquired a disability while, I was surrounded with disability all around me. I acquired my own disability at the peak of my career. And as such, accessibility became not only my new career path as part of retooling, but it obviously became a necessity to me. What I like to tell people is I see accessibility from both sides of the coin, from those individuals who have to implement it and the challenges they face in implementing it. And of course, from the lived experience for those of us who have to live, work, and play. So I like your tag, Brian, to gamification, because we do want to play. We do want to live independently as best we can. My tagline, it really speaks to this whole concept of, organizations often see the word accessibility, see standards, and are totally overwhelmed and almost paralyzed towards, what they need to do, how they need to do, and how they need to get started. And basically what I say is, let's stop talking about it and let's start doing it. It's really not that complicated, but it does take commitment and it does take planning. But it isn't really, when we break it down, you'll see as we go through this process, it's not overly complex, but we just need to do it. So hopefully this will influence and inspire you all.
All right, Jen, we'll move on.
Yeah, no, it sounds super cheesy, but I am inspired by this panel. I think there's so many really great points that have already been made, or how, like as Brian mentioned, or in particular how he came to experience accessibility and not wanting to do anything else. My name is Jennifer Chadwick. I'm the Senior Accessibility Consultant at Siteimprove. So amongst other things, sort of scanning digital properties for SEO, analytics, performance, security, that kind of thing. One of our key pillars at Siteimprove is also scanning for WCAG conformance and accessibility. So we're pretty passionate about it. So it's one of those vendor tools that helps you kind of manage and monitor your progress. But I'm on the strategy side. So I'm a former user experience designer myself, which again, almost a decade ago came to that aha moment where I'm now sort of training and teaching teams, because I was part of that project lifecycle. My job and my role was to build out digital experiences on web and mobile. But it wasn't until I sort of became a user researcher and observed how people used assistive technologies, or how vastly different and diverse end user experiences were, that I realized I wasn't, I was too exclusive in my designs. I wasn't thinking inclusively. So to me, I've got my favorite saying here, which is accessibility is just someone's user experience. As I think we pointed out, that's the reality. So if it's been ignored or not been considered before, let's have that attitude shift to just understand those are people's experiences, and we're here to deliver it. So yeah, I have sort of hit the ground running, sort of training and advocating for accessibility within my own digital team, designers, developers, QA, who was kind of all had their own essential skill sets. And that's what I say as well, which is accessibility and inclusive design. You don't have to take on any other skill set than your own. You're a writer, learn how to think and write inclusively every day. And that makes all the significant difference. So without further ado, I think there's so many ways we're going to share how to implement these best practices. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I'm so glad to have everyone here. I think this is going to be great. All right, so let's move on to, before we proceed, let's take a quick look at the poll questions. All right, so what did people say here? The first question is, why did you or your company get involved with accessibility? 13% of people said a customer requested it for a specific product. 5% said customers said they would start requiring it for future products. 54% said we prioritize accessibility before customers required it. That's great. And 29% said other. Question 2, how long has your company been producing accessible products? 21% of people said less than 1 year. See if I can summarize this a little bit more easily. About a third of the people responding have been working on accessibility for more than 5 years. The rest of the people are pretty evenly divided between less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, and 2 to 5 years. What percentage, question 3, what percentage of your accessibility work is done by vendors? Almost half of the people said about up to 25% of their work is done by vendors. Another fifth said up 26 to 50%, and then the remaining third, 30%, are sending more than half of their accessibility work to vendors. Question 4, what is your accessibility role? About a third of the people identify as accessibility specialists. Most of the remaining people are project managers or product owners, and most of the remaining attendees are designers or developers or leaders of their organizations. The smallest percentages of attendees are content authors and sourcing specialists. Number 5, how would you rate your leaders' level of understanding or investment in accessibility? The largest group said medium, followed by high, and then low. And finally, what is the biggest challenge you face in becoming accessible? There were two groups that sort of came to the top of this question. About a quarter of the people said lack of understanding, and another quarter said disruptive to current processes. Excuse me. And then a third quarter said other. Apathy was thankfully listed at 3%, which is a good sign. So we'll consider all of these results as we progress through our different topics here. I'll hand it over to Brian to talk about topic 1, challenges of starting and growing an accessibility operation.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And pardon me if I take a handful of tea breaks. My daughter, she's 6 in kindergarten, has got a cold. They're back in school without masks on now, and she's doing Taekwondo. So I think I might have caught her bug. So challenges of starting and growing part 1. Really, it seems like a basic idea in that growth is necessary for anything to develop, but it's how to do it, how to get there, what are the blockers, and the idea of accessibility is no different in an organization. So as we look at it and try to frame it, I think it's important to remember that it's a journey. The work isn't finished. It's getting through certain projects, it's growing the culture, it's getting processes better aligned, but it's never done. So what does it mean starting versus growing versus a mature accessibility program? So you're all here today. That means you've started, and that's the right thing to do. And the growth part of it is definitely going to be hard work. It's going to be a struggle, but the light at the end of the tunnel is that the mature program, it incorporates accessibility without extra work, extra budget, extra time. So what is your accessibility catalyst? I think we've talked about that in the poll question a little bit. Why is the company, why is your organization interested in it? Internal commitments, contractual obligations, legal responsibilities? Is it an employee who just really loves the topic and wants to introduce it to the company? Whatever the reason, great, run with that. It doesn't matter where you start. It's important to start. That's it. And in this next bullet, it's interesting to me because it is an origin story, right? How you begin in this field. With our panelists, everybody has come about it a little bit differently, but each group or role that you come from, when you consider accessibility for the first time, presents unique challenges, ways to start, and it really gives you a certain level of footing. But what I'm sure the organizations and people in the organizations will realize soon enough is that it's so broad. It permeates everything. So it can't just remain one group's function, one group's responsibility. So how can we turn growing pains into growing opportunities? I like the positive sentiment on this one. So roles, responsibilities, and the product life cycle. The PDLC, product development life cycle, I think of it as an opportunity to annotate for accessibility. But how do you do that? Where do you start attaching certain tasks? Is it at the beginning, at the end, at the middle, for which roles? Then that leads to more questions and more questions. And what you'll see and hear and experience in this webinar from Pina, Todd, and Jen is that there are tools, there are approaches that we can take that get us to a point where it becomes smoother, it becomes more defined. And one of my most, probably half my day right now working is trying to develop roadmaps, looking at our products and understanding what is it going to take to get this thing accessible, pulling it apart so that we can put it back together with the accessibility connective tissue included. Another aspect of that is auditing current products. That's where we can start to consider the expertise of third-party companies, vendors. They also can help in developing in-house expertise, trainings, resources, takeaway documents, and then really trying to get accessibility ingrained in the company to where it's not a nice to have, it's not a discussion point, it's not attached to sprints, but it's a culture and it's a policy. Growth is good, but the goal is to mature as an accessibility operation. And it really is integrated across all departments. So with Jen, how you came into this with UX, you saw the idea of design and how it impacted users, but then I'm sure in your role, you're looking at how are developers creating the components? What am I designing my experiences to fit inside of? And then that branches to the next group. And then the developers are passing it on to QA to test. QA needs to know how to test for accessibility. That's a skill set. It's something that takes time to get to. So again, vendors can help with that, but as we branch out, it starts to really become this inclusive thing where no one's left untouched. No process is really left untouched. With the idea of maturing though, we get to a point, hopefully, and it's not done, but we get to a point where it's not reactionary. We're not looking at contracts and saying, is this client asking us to be accessible? It doesn't matter, right? It's part of the process now to where it's inextricably linked. It's ingrained. You can't take it out anymore. Some ways to get there or aspects of that are developing style guides. At one of my previous employers, we had a HIG that we spent a month annotating for accessibility to where we discuss color combinations, heading structures for the different components, all the different ways that we just want to put nuggets in, and so people follow along the trail of accessibility. And it's a constant reminder that this is part of the job, and it helps us keep people cemented in that thinking. And I think the true marker of a mature organization who's trying to develop or work towards accessibility is when employees are really just comfortable. They feel like they know what is expected of them. The QA team knows when to test, whether it's agile or waterfall. They've got their marching orders, they've got their test cases, expected behaviors, ways that they're using the screen readers, bookmarklets, whatever the tools may be. And same goes for every single group. The processes are clear, well documented, and repeatable.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. I was about to be the time cop. We've already enjoyed ourselves talking so much. We're running a little over. As I transition, I just want to remind people, if you have questions in the course of the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A. Oops, and we will incorporate them into our discussion. As I transition to my topic, I want to say, Brian, to your points, to both the point Pina made earlier about oftentimes accessibility being initially implemented as an add-on, and then sort of the importance of integrating it into the larger process. What I found in my experience is because of that, people often relegate that to production or to design and development, where I think one exciting thing that your team at Great Minds is doing, Brian, is you're looking at what's the role the content team can play. Alt text and other alternative content isn't really alternative content, it's content. So how do we apply the passion? How do we apply the attention to detail? How do we apply the intentionality to alternative content that we do to all the other content we create? And I think that's really exciting, and that's part of taking this proactive approach. A lot of so topic 2, partnering with accessibility vendors. Oftentimes, when companies are getting started, they rely on vendors to help them either support their existing in-house accessibility operations, to provide them with guidance or consulting as they get started, or sometimes to sort of take on the bulk of the accessibility work. We found that vendors can help clients expand their limits in these ways. And vendor selection often depends on 4 limiting factors, which you can see here represented in this diagram. The diagram shows 4 very worried looking people being squeezed by walls that are labeled budget, people, time, and knowledge or skill. And based on the closeness of the given wall to the person who's in charge of decision making in the company, their choices about how much work to award to vendors or which vendors to select will vary. If budget is the primary concern, if the knowledge or skill level is the primary concern, those things can guide how companies select vendors to fulfill various tasks. Some common questions that companies ask when they're starting to engage vendors is, what do we already know how to do? Maybe we already have the in-house capacity. Maybe we just need some support. Maybe we can develop a vendor relationship that helps do the excess work. And once again, how does our in-house capacity meet our need? How hands-on do we want to be? Sometimes time constraints, the level of in-house expertise just doesn't allow for a lot of direct day-to-day management of the accessibility related tasks involved with producing a product. And that will influence the vendors who are selected. What existing relationships do we have with vendors? I know in the educational publishing space, accessibility publishers began implementing accessibility as part of their general production cycle. So it became part of good digital design. And as a result, existing content solutions vendors started developing accessibility capacity. So sometimes you might have an existing relationship with the company that provides accessibility services. And what's our long-term plan? Do we want to sort of engage a vendor right now while we build up our in-house capacity and then sort of evolve that relationship as we grow our in-house strength to do this? Or are we more interested in developing a sort of ecosystem of service providers, each with their own sort of niche to be filled in producing these products? One big challenge with engaging vendors is what I call the plumber problem. And if you've ever hired a plumber, you might have thought some of these things. How does he know the valve will definitely go in 1 month? Is plastic really as good as copper? What just happened under my house for 5 hours? And the common theme in all of those thoughts is when we hire experts, because we might not have the expertise to do what they do. If that's the case, how do we determine that they're actually delivering what they said they were going to deliver to us? And I like to say trust begins with proof. That can be in the form of samples or testimonials from other clients who've used vendors. It could be through credentialing. We're sort of in an exciting time now, I think. The International Association of Accessibility Professionals has been offering a wider and wider range of credentials related to a bunch of different accessibility skill sets and knowledge bases. I know that we have a big internal drive at our company now to be able to express our existing knowledge of electronic document accessibility. So PDFs and PowerPoints, for example, by getting our accessible document specialist credentials. Another credential that's commonly used is Global Certified Accessible through Benitez, which relates to EPUB, which is another credential our company is in the process of obtaining. Third-party QA and user testing. I mean, the greatest proof of whether or not a product is accessible is if you hand it off to someone who relies on assistive technology to use it, and they give you direct feedback that it works, that it was a pleasing experience, that they could accomplish what they want to. I often say when you're starting a relationship with a vendor or vendors who provide accessibility services and you're uncertain either about what to require of them or what success looks like, you can start a triangle of truth. And this is not to imply that anyone's trying to be deceptive, but it's a way of everybody involved in the vendor relationship being able to clearly understand expectations and clearly understand results. And so in the case of sample submission, that might be make sure you ask 2 or 3 vendors for samples for a certain remediated product or alt text, and then compare the results. See which one aligns with your understanding of what the project should be, or aligns with sort of a third party's assessment of that sample. Another common example is using a third-party QA vendor as part of the production process. Or by having either one vendor author content and another vendor copy edit it, or sort of separate teams providing those services. I also like to stress that, as with all relationships, the most effective vendor partnerships emphasize reciprocation that goes beyond good work leads to more work. Experienced vendors, they can provide support and guidance for clients who are just getting started. Brian mentioned this during his segment of the webinar. I also really advocate for a sample stage when you're just starting a relationship with the vendor or you're just starting a project. Use the sample stage to as a start of a dialogue, as an opportunity to sort of discuss maybe why different vendors had different approaches to certain aspects of a product, which can accommodate that. There's some things, keyboard traps and color contrast, which, you know, that's pretty clear cut, whether or not someone gets trapped when they're using a keyboard or not. But there are other things where there's some gray area or variation that you know, might all produce a product that's accessible, might have varying degrees of usability or varying levels of user satisfaction. And also as a chance to clarify product and process expectations. What we often find with clients starting out or attempting to grow their accessibility operations is they take accessibility very seriously, they're enthusiastic about it, but for a variety of different reasons, they haven't really had the chance to fully flesh out what they expect the output to look like, or how they expect it to function. And so the sample stage can provide an opportunity for them to sort of think about that in a more deliberate way and communicate that with the people who will be helping them with the work. And I like to say everyone loves revenue, but feedback is also valuable because we reinvest it. There's nothing like feedback, whether that's from the client or the people, the end users for the product, to give us the idea that we're doing the job correctly. Finally, I'd like to say, before I move on to Pina, we're increasingly talking to clients about moving from a services focus to a solutions focus. And what that means to us is, instead of a vendor receiving a set of instructions, which they follow point by point, what the vendor provides is ideas about how to make a product better or how to address certain issues with the product. So it's more about a client coming to the vendor with questions and then relying on that vendor's base of expertise and experience to come up with possible solutions. And we found, especially for new clients, that's very useful. Pina, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. So just listening to both of you already, there's a couple of keywords that come to mind that I'm going to try to sort of loop into what I'm going to talk about. And those key things are about growth, maturity, and triangular truth. And you'll see why. So when we talk about an accessibility organizational framework, what does that mean? What people often, don't even know that these things kind of exist and that they can be used to help, particularly large organizations. So a framework really is a guide, right? That sort of brings together all the pieces of the puzzle and sort of helps you identify where you're going to think about accessibility and make it happen, right? The guide is really about the what you need to do, not necessarily about the how, but it will drive integration and it will drive that cultural change. This is particularly true, as I said before, for large organizations that have a ton of stakeholders engaged in the process and also have a lot of processes that touch accessibility. So let's take a look at what a framework looks like. This is the next slide. So we broke down the framework into 5 distinct areas, each of which do not have to happen in silos. In fact, we like them to happen in parallel in some ways because you'll see they feed onto each other. So there's no particular order that says you've got to do this before this, but there is some rational understanding of why you might want to start with number one, which is really about, if you're in an organization, it's really understanding what is the accessibility mandate or the driver that is leading you towards this goal. Brian mentioned earlier, is it regulatory requirements? Is it customer or market share? The reality is an organization needs to clearly articulate what is their mandate, what are they willing to do, why they're willing to do, and make sure that they have the necessary leadership to support this. So initially, accessibility can be expensive. Let's not kid ourselves. We're trying to build skills. We're trying to buy tools, so we are going to need to invest in accessibility. So particularly in large organizations, if you're looking to, to deal with thousands of products or web pages or applications, there is going to have to be some investment that's going to be made into that. And so that leadership, that buy-in from your product owner, from your chief information officers, and if you have a chief accessibility officer, that's great, but all of them need to be on the same page. And you need to be sure that as part of that leadership too, you have representations of persons with disabilities. So whether you have people in the executive levels that have accessibility needs or have disclosed the disability or not, make sure that you have the voice of persons with disabilities so you can ensure that your mandate is actually an impactful one. It's not just about meeting a checklist. It's not just about compliance, but it's really about what difference will it make to those individuals who are going to use your products and use your services. The second level of the pillar really speaks to about that foundation, right? So you're talking about, you're looking at your policies, you're looking at your, what standards are you going to adopt? You're looking at where, what kind of training and education are you going to need to build that awareness within the organization? This is what I call sort of a little bit of that baseline exercise. Where are you? If you're going to start accessibility, where are you? Where are you starting from? You know that you probably want to achieve whatever, if we're talking about digital standards, for instance, you're going to want to achieve EN 301-549, which are the European standards. If you're doing built, for instance, you're going to want to achieve accessibility environments. If you're content, you want to make sure that those accessibility standards for PDF-IU or UI rather are met. So what are those standards that you're trying to achieve and what's that goal? And the whole process here is really about looking at the policies, the processes. Where do you find that opportunity to inject that accessibility language or accessibility checkpoint so that when you're building out, you're building out the capacity. You're actually building out the capacity. This is an area where many organizations will actually go to a third-party vendor to help them actually identify where their baseline is and what are some of the barriers that exist, and help them prioritize how they're going to address those gaps or those barriers. The third section really speaks about that whole concept of integration and implementation. And there's two components to that. And I always say, my tagline was stop talking about it, just do it. You're looking at opportunities where you've got a new project in flight, you've got a product that you're starting to develop, put forward accessibility requirements right then and there. You project managers, ask those questions right up front. Make sure that you ask the questions, who's using this product? How is it going to be used? Who's using this website? How is this website going to be used? Is it an interactive website? Is it dynamic? Is it a static, which these days don't exist very, very much, but is it a learning platform, for instance? Is it a gaming tool? How, what is this tool going to be used for? What's the purpose of this tool? And take the opportunity right then and there to sort of say, we're going to stop the bleeding, we're going to stop adding barriers, and we're going to include accessibility in everything that we do effective now. And you can, again, that sort of can break down in two aspects. You can do it internally or you can do it externally.
Hi, Pina.
The second,
Sorry to be the time cop. Believe it or not, we're at quarter of. So
okay, so I'm gonna wrap up the two and then very quickly go to the, okay. So the fourth, so integration, and then the second part of that is remediating, right? How devising a plan to remediate what needs to be addressed. The fourth one really speaks about reporting, audit, and requirements. And the key here is, what I want to really stress here is that as part of project management, we know that if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. How are you going to measure accessibility? How do you know you're successful? Right? So think about those indicators, those dimensions you're going to use to measure. And the last component of this really speaks to about the maturity. And Brian spoke a little bit about that. So how do you know that you're moving from growth to maturity? By ensuring all your documentations are up to date, that you're moving that initial capacity building to truly integrate to an integrated modality. The next few slides are just really about sort of reiterating the fact that accessibility is one of those things where you need to treat it like security. It's important, it's imperative, it's an imperative business driver. And if you do that, then it doesn't get compromised or set aside because it's seen as an afterthought. Communication is key. So as you go through this process, communicate frequently, let people know, what you're doing, how to, which stakeholders will be engaged in the process and what their needs are. Use your RACI models to identify roles and roles and accountability. And the last thing I'm going to say, which will lead to Jen's thing, is really is what I say, take that Gemba walk, right? The Gemba walk is really about, as a leader, as people who do things, become familiar with other people's jobs, walk the grounds, talk to people, engage people in the conversation to get different perspectives on accessibility. As Brian said, people experience accessibility different and do accessibility differently. So by speaking to them and really hearing them out and working with them collaboratively, you're going to end up with better products. And there's going to be a real understanding, a much more clear understanding of what roles and responsibilities everyone plays in accessibility. So I'm going to pause here and pass it to Jennifer, and apology if it took too long.
No, Pina, you raised so many excellent points. So just for me, yeah, and Brian, you talked about defining roles and responsibilities in order to support that organizational framework that Pina mentioned, building education capacity, but also walk so is it Gemba?
Gemba.
Walk?
Yeah,
so
Gemba.
where it's so we have practitioners that we all work with, or you may be a specialist in design, content development, or you may be a project manager trying to allow space for people to do these things. So yeah, so this is a process, an accessibility roles and responsibilities mapping methodology, or ARRM, is this framework that I open source, totally free, and it's a tool to use. It's a team exercise that I heard other accessibility strategists talking about at a conference, and I just fell in love with it because it's kind of the thing that I wish I had when I was a UX designer, for that collaboration, that understanding, that sort of assignment of ownership. So how has the ARM been described? By me, usually. It's assigning ownership to get things done. Don't talk about it, let's just get it done. It's a clear set of responsibilities for each of those individual team members, which we'll talk about, and that's the purpose of it. A framework to fight accessibility apathy. And I don't think, hopefully that was really low on the scale in our poll. Some people are overwhelmed and not knowing where to start or what to do, or looking at a sort of a long list of issues or tasks or accessibility barriers that exist that we need to tackle somehow. And I call it a gift to digital teams. So very selfishly. So what it is, it's a W3C resource, World Wide Web Consortium. Obviously, they're the publishers of the standards for web content accessibility guidelines. So some of those roles and responsibilities we've mapped in our sort of task force that we've built out of about 5 or 6 of the specialists. And we're always asking for additional volunteers or members of the group but the resource is, kind of mapped to WCAG, but it's also mapped to best practices. So it's a resource, a framework, open source team exercise through the Education and Outreach Working Group at the W3C. The first public draft, all our heads came together to create a master checkpoint list of all the roles and responsibilities for people, and then we sort of broke it down by role to help you get started. That was released in 2020, and now we're just sort of witnessing and conducting workshops. So defining roles and responsibilities, it's a team exercise that's primarily done by 4 core practitioners, but we'll get to QA testers, user researchers, project managers, accessibility specialists in a moment. But it usually involves these 4 people: user experience design, visual designer, content author, and front-end developer. So we go to the next slide. Exactly. Sort of, what about me? Where do these other roles fit in the ARM picture? And what I would say is that the exercise that we're going to walk through, the framework I'm going to share, is generally done by those 4 people. But business analysts will, their responsibility as part of supporting this team exercise is to, as we all said, make sure that it's conformance requirements that you'll build as part of your organizational framework is incorporated into the business analysis. So then that feeds into this team exercise when people do the work, and then the outcome of that framework exercise to assign ownership and responsibility for those tasks. QA testers will validate that the work, after the great work has been done. Another point is that user research, UX research is so important, not only just for usability, but which is tied to accessibility, but having a wide range of users regularly giving you feedback and telling their user story. So we capture it and make sure that it's incorporated into the team exercise, right? So user researchers, through that research, feedback from end users may say, I have a complete barrier with this. Let's add it to that task list, and then let's conduct the exercise to find out who's going to help fix that. Project managers, you are responsible for supporting all the core practitioners and doing the exercise on a regular basis. Well, that's where I come in. I help teams do that as a specialist. If you can think of any other roles, please, again, no questions left unanswered. Please reach out or tell us what if you don't see yourself on this list here. So yeah, moving on to essentially, Pina, you called it. It really is kind of our version of a RACI chart, where you kind of try to identify who is responsible, accountable, considered, I think, and informed. Is that right? So this is that core team exercise, an open source framework exercise that you can do at any time, whether at the organizational level or primarily at the project level. Yeah, this is a great image that was added, which is the task. The tasks may be making sure that all videos have captions, or it could be a very specific case where these images on this particular page don't have any a text alternative. So whatever task is at hand, what we do, the framework looks at who's going to be the primary owner, who's going to be actually accountable for ensuring that that task gets remediated. They drive the decision-making process. It may be one primary person. If it's just a straight code fix, it may only be one, just the primary. However, if the alternative text has not been coded into the component, and also a description needs to be written, you might consider a secondary collaborator with that developer as the primary. So the content author may be the secondary on that. So they provide the information or influence the decision, but ultimately the primary person will make sure it's done. And then the contributor, there may or may not be someone. A contributor may be a project manager who delivers some of the information that those 2 folks need to complete the task. And then if we move on, yeah, so this is the heart of it. This is the exercise. We call it the role-based decision tree. We also have, I'll show you in a minute, we also have sort of visualized it as a roadmap with exit points, right? So which role should own this accessibility consideration, issue, task, whatever we want to call it, in your life cycle? All the time, or just related to this particular project? You go down this list. It's a bulleted list here on the slide, but it could be a process of elimination, 1 to 8. So you start really, really high level. Should this be, is it a is it driven just by the business or sort of a non-functional consideration, i.e. we don't have anyone managing PDF accessibility. That's one task. That would be something non-functional. It would stay at that business level. Or something more specific where a number of our images don't have a text alternative. Is it a content author consideration? Stop right there. I would say the primary owner might be the content author. Is this a visual design consideration? UX design consideration? Do we have to change the page layout in order to remediate this issue? Or is it a front-end implementation development code fix? And then you go through that list. Hopefully people are putting their hands up and saying, yes, it's me. And if that's already been done and you've created a solution together, then is it a QA testing consideration? Is it now time to test that? And then what's wonderful about this is that if no one puts their hand.
5
so
minutes.
no,
I want to show
sorry,
those
no, I think we're almost there, but we'll show maybe just the roadmap. But if no one is there, then if no one has put their hand up, then it becomes a project management concern because we clearly have a gap in our processes. So this is, an overview of the role-based accessibility framework. This is just a visualization of a road with exits. So exit 1 is business, exit 2, content authoring, exit 3 is a visual design consideration, UX, exit 4, exit 5, front-end dev, exit 6 is testing. And so, I think we just have time for one quick go of the framework. So on this page we have exit 2. So consider this checkpoint for WCAG success criteria 1.1. Informative alternative text is provided for an image. Who should own this requirement? Again, it's just an example of going through that list. Is it a business or sort of non-functional requirement at a high level? No, it's more specific than that. This is the content authoring consideration. Yes. So that's where we get off exit 2, because we know that the content author is responsible for a number of things. And just before we move on the screen, we have what a content author or what us as a sort of in the framework is preset to define what kind of things we feel the content author is responsible for. And content authors, please tell us if this is wrong. But copy decks, images, taxonomies, labels, copy, text transcripts, captions, semantic things. Anyway, so if we move on to the next slide, what I wanted to share is the fact that, we have a way to conduct the exercise in a really easy, loose framework way that hopefully can be adopted by your team. But then as a resource, we've already sort of created these role-based templates. So we've broken down a sort of master checklist of things that are, as I said, based on WCAG, but also based on best practices for UX designers, visual designers, content authors, and front-end developers. And then, as we mentioned, it could either be, this process could be done at a project level where those people are actually getting down in the weeds to complete the work. Or I've also conducted the ARM exercise at an organizational level. Which department is responsible, or which vendor is now responsible for delivering this content or these tasks to us? So this is an open source. This is our wiki page. So the links in the slide deck can reach out directly to those lists. We conduct workshops on a regular basis. So if you're interested in sort of test driving the framework with us, please get in touch. So I think that was my last piece.
Yeah, we just had another question that this,
wonderful.
Would appreciate an even deeper dive into ARRM.
Todd, you're absolutely right. It was a tough one to pull in, but hopefully I covered everything and just tying it back to the reasons that everyone had mentioned before.
Yeah, no, that's
love your thoughts. So thanks everyone.
I know we're getting close to the end, and we'll definitely follow up with a deeper dive. There's so much there's so much material to cover. I think we're always challenged on time. And someone also asked if they can obtain the deck, and the answer to that is yes. I know we're very close on time. I'd like to give an opportunity for any additional questions from the audience before we give you a couple key takeaways. And I would also like to call people's attention to the exit poll. We'd ask you to take a couple just a few seconds to answer those questions before you depart. So does anyone else have any questions about what we've discussed? Please feel free to add them to the QA. All right, well, we'll see if anyone else comes up with anything right now. But I like each one of us to offer one key takeaway of the great list that everybody's provided. So Brian, starting with you, what would you offer as one of your key takeaways?
I would say moving from reactive to proactive. That's the end game for the maturity model, trying to get to a place where it's no longer bolted on, but it's baked in. It's moved all the way left for accessibility.
And I think for my key takeaway, I would say just really encourage, and a lot of my points touch on this, encourage the dialogue between clients and vendors, encourage samples and feedback as a way of everybody more clearly understanding how to make the best possible product and clarifying expectations and processes. Pina, what would you give as your takeaway?
For me, thank you for that. I have two. I mean, one is make sure you create an actionable plan, right? You want a plan that is realistic, that is manageable, that you can start really seeing progress as you get through it, because if not, it can be quite overwhelming. So, you know, especially for large organization, it doesn't have to be complex, but there needs to be a plan to sort of make sure that you keep people accountable to what they need to do and things get done. The other thing I want to stress, and I can't stress it enough, is really, you know, speaking to that voice of different users, different perspectives, persons with visible, invisible disabilities, intersectionality, because accessibility is really experienced differently, even in different cultures. So when you're thinking about your accessibility and what you're going to include, it's more than code, right? It's more than even the plan. It's about people. And I think it's really important for us to keep that as the center of what brings our, brings us towards this journey.
And Jen, what would you leave as your takeaway?
Just I'm inspired by those three things that you mentioned. Maybe I'll change mine, which is, yeah, similar to what Brian said about shifting all the way left. You want to become proactive. You want to move. Let's just try to move from an area of fear, of non-compliance or uncertainty about how people use the web, to a positive, people-centric, sort of proactive space where you're excited to make these changes rather than feeling it's a burden. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you once again. This webinar is once again proof that we have so much more to talk about. So, including more ARRM. So thank you very much to our panelists for attending today and sharing their valuable knowledge. Please, if you have additional questions that you haven't answered today, please feel free to contact us separately. And we will continue these conversations about very important topics related to accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.